Okay, so we are continuing on with our Portraits of Discipleship. Today we're going to finish up with our lesson of being a member of the body and in trying to understand what we have as far as the body is concerned. We looked at last week the kind of what it means, benefits of being in the body. So we had salvation, we have identification with Jesus, we've got support, edification, we have prayers, then we have strength in numbers. I don't know if we got to talk about strength in numbers very much, but why is it important to have strength in numbers? Just before we go on and talk about responsibilities, why is it important to have strength in numbers? For support. There's a lot of people, you'll meet a lot of people who will say that they are very spiritual people, but they don't do what? They don't go to church. They don't do church. And I don't know how many people like that I've met over the course of my life. You guys may have worked with a ton of them over the years, may still work with them. So what generally tends to happen, because that's all, when someone tells me that, I just can't leave it alone. You've got to keep asking and delving more and more into it. Because when someone is religious and as they claim that they're religious, and a lot of times just in finding out more about people, you ask them what congregation they go to, they'll tell you. Then another pretty natural question is, well, when do you go? How many times do you go? They'll tell you sometimes that's once a week, and sometimes it's just like us, 2, 3. All the people in the room here, we're attending 2, 3 times a week. Sometimes it'll be once a month. But when you talk to someone who will say that they're spiritual, and this is really the point, who's spiritual, but they don't do church, when you talk to them about how often they're spiritual or they think about spiritual things, do you know what the likely answer you're going to get is? Hardly at all. Hardly at all. So, someone who's spiritual but has no construct of a worship assembly and saints that they know, that they keep in contact with every week, that tends to do something very, very specific to you. And it's very, very high. So when I see this, I can guess what the outcome is a very, very high percentage of the time. If they're spiritual, they're not very spiritual at all, because they have no construct of being somewhere and worshiping with people. They don't what? They don't think about it. They don't think about it. I should get Jenny in here and let you guys get a lecture about how it was to teach for 2 months during COVID, starting in March. So March, April, May, when she had to do it online. It was horrible. It was horrible. Because you couldn't get the kids to do anything. Couldn't even get the kids to show up. Because when you're kind of out of sight, you're out of what? You're out of mind. And how often does that work? As things go, a very, very high number of times. Meaning that someone could tell me that they're a very spiritual person, but they don't do church. A very, very small percentage of the time, they can think about spiritual things with regularity. But that's a really small percentage of the time. If I meet someone who says that they're spiritual, they have some basic beliefs, but otherwise it has no impact on their day-to-day life. And I can make that assumption, and I'm going to be right the vast majority of the time. Versus all of the people who seek strength in numbers, who seek to be a part of a constructed, put together worship assembly. Now, how many of those people do you think about it every day? How many of those people do you think about it every day? Very, very likely a what? An extremely high number of people. An extremely high number of people. Some churches get into, and I've done this a little bit off and on, but some churches get into a specific reading pattern where they'll give readings to everyone who can read through the Bible in a year. I've done that in the past. They'll have their readings in the mornings on Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings, kind of revolve around that, 2 short passages from the readings of the last week. They'll have memory verses. I have seen this. They'll have memory verses where, for example, the person standing up making the announcements or someone else at the end will stand up and the whole church recites a memory verse. Or they'll have prayers that are written and that they're communicated. You know, we've got our email list. They'll be communicated every day. I mean, things that are drawing people into the spiritual fray, as it were, every day. Now, what do you think works better? Something like that? Or something where you just say, I'm spiritual, but I don't really do church? Who's going to be the better, more spiritually attuned person? The one that's got the structure to it. This is why God told us to do it. And we do it for a very specific reason. It's easy to get cynical. There's a lot of churches. So a lot of churches would want to do that, and maybe their first thought is money. It's a lot easier to get people to give when they're what? When they're right there, when the plate's got to go right past you. You'll understand, we rarely talk about money. We want people here because we want people made better. And part of the way that we're made better is just simply by being around each other. Once we stop doing that and stop being around each other, the decline will happen pretty fast. Okay? There's strength in that. So let's go through some responsibilities. Let's jump over to some responsibilities now of being in the body. The first one, we've got to respect God's plan and purpose. So let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And let's look 2 places. Verse 18. What does 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 18 say? Okay, now go down and read verse 24. Okay, so God creates, designs in tremendous wisdom the human body. And how do we know? How do we marvel at the human body? What is marvelous to you about the human body? Okay, and pick apart. What part is marvelous to you? Okay, so Brenda said the heart. I would have expected that out of her. Why is that, Brenda? Because you only worked in it for how many decades? But how many? 20 years. Okay, I thought you said 20 decades. I'm like, that's not right. 20 years. To me, guess what part of the body it is for me? The eyes. Just unbelievable. The eye is so complicated. I've got 3 different doctors. One for the front of my eye, one for the middle of my eye, and one for the back of my eye. And I'm not kidding. It's that complex. So you can see the wisdom of God in the fact that you've got this body. But yet the same wisdom is also shown where? In the body of Jesus Christ. So in the church and how it's put together. The same wisdom. And so I respect this plan and I respect the purpose. So what does respecting the plan and respecting the purpose, what does that say to you? You know, what point or what idea might you think, now that I'm telling you we need to respect the plan and the purpose, so what idea does that give to you about my responsibility to the body? Okay, so I'm going to take care of it. And what does that mean? Do what now? Yeah, okay. We have to obey it. You know, taking care of your body as you get older, especially as you cross over, what's the magic line of age that you really have to start paying attention to your body? Do you know what it is? Do you know what it is? What's the magic age? Don't be too discouraged if you missed it, but what's the magic age that you got to start taking care of your body mentally and physically? I mean, really paying attention to it. It's a little higher than that. 60. So when you turn 60, the markers of physical and mental decline really begin to present. So if you want to take care of your body, do it before you're 60, but definitely if it's going to be your intention, you really, really want to pay attention to it after you turn 60. So we see the necessity in that because we feel it, we experience it every day. And when you look at the body, my respect for the body, my desire to want the body to be as good as it can be, means that I've got to get on some things. I've got to get on some things. There's only so long that most people are going to ignore pain. Here we come back to the great old wonderful bell curve. So you got the bell curve. Some people who are in pain never do what? Never complain, and more importantly, they never do what about it? They never go to the doctor about it. So they're the outliers. Most of the time, and then of course they're on the outliers, and I need to put this so you guys can explain, so you guys can understand it. So a lot of people will never go to the doctor. So they're on kind of this end of the bell curve. This is hard to do when I'm backwards to you guys. So they're on the left side of the bell curve. Then you have the people on the other end who every time they feel just a little bit out of the ordinary, they're going to go to the doctor. So they're the right side of the bell curve. Everyone else falls into a really nice medium, meaning that when you understand that something is going wrong, it might not be the day one that you know that something's going wrong, but relatively soon after you realize something's going wrong, what do? You go to the doctor, you take care of it. You have a respect. We have, when we see something going wrong, hopefully, what are we going to do? We're going to take care of it. We're going to snap into action. Sometimes circumstances will arise where that action is a little bit slower. Sometimes circumstances exist where that action is quicker. We're people, and not only if we're the ones doing the help, we are complex people. The people who are needing the help are very complex people. So that makes just this infinite array of ways to respond. But the fact is, we do respond, because we are, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, a body with members that need to be taken care of. So my responsibility first is to just respect the plan, respect the purpose of it. Purpose of it is to build up, and I need to act within that. Second responsibility that we need to talk about is the idea of authority. Let's actually go to Colossians chapter 1. We read Ephesians chapter 1 a lot. Let's go to Colossians chapter 1. And someone read Colossians chapter 1 and verse 18. So Colossians chapter 1 and verse 18. So with Him being the head of the body, Him having preeminence, that means something very specific for us. Because He is the head of the body, what does He get to do to the body? He gets to control it. He gets to direct it. And me being a part of the body has to what? Go along with it. I've got to follow it. I guess I could bring up the word I need to respect it. So, talking about Christ being the head of the body and me having to respect that authority in the church, now what does that open up in your mind as to how the body exists in the world? If I have to respect the head of the body, so what does that mean that the church now has to do? I got to follow everything that Jesus wants me to do. So now let's keep going along that line. So now what does that mean? If I've got to follow everything that Jesus wants me to do in the church, so now what does that begin to mean to you? There's a lot of different answers for this, and all of them will be right. But what does it mean to you? Okay, it means that we're going to act like disciples. And disciples in the end of Matthew 28 went out and did what? They made other disciples. So respecting Christ's authority means that I'm going to try to make other disciples, including who else can be made disciples? And don't forget about this. I was warned about this as a younger preacher. I mean, just over and over again, almost to the point where it got a bit much. But I'm glad, because I'd tried my very best to take it to heart. Preacher saves everybody except who? His own family. Yeah, his own family. So this was drilled into me from a young man. Don't try to save everyone and end up losing your own family. So when you think about respecting the authority of Christ, and one of those elements is to try to make disciples, who else can be made a disciple? Your own family. So don't forget to make disciples out of your own family first. But there's a lot of other answers. And what can respect for authority mean? For Christ, for the body. What can respect for authority mean? Okay, so I have to stick with teachings. And how does that compare to what we're seeing in Lufkin? So how does that compare to what we're seeing in Lufkin? Yes, there is a component of that. Brenda said they do whatever they want to. There is a component of that, which we do need to discuss. But there is also something else. So physically, I suppose, what is the closest place to us? Next door, which is. So we're going to come back to that. I've got one other minor point to make. Timber Creek originally, before they changed the sign, was what? First Assembly of God. They have very detailed beliefs and very detailed ways that they do things. Where did that come from? It came from man, and I don't know if it came from a conference or a board of directors. I don't know exactly the structure, but the point was someone, probably lots of people in the past, made up some rules by which they go by. So what is the next? I used to love Grayson. He'd say, "Dad, what's your favorite NFL team?" And I'd tell him, he's like, "Well, what's your second favorite NFL team?" And then I'd tell him that. And then guess what his next question would be? So what's your third favorite NFL team? So what's our second closest building to us? I get so disoriented in the building. So right across the loop, what is that? That's the Baptist church. What do they operate by? And maybe I should have been better at telling you guys this over the years, but there is Hiscox Baptist Manual. It's a very, very tiny little book. I've got a couple of them at home. But it's a Baptist manual. Now, those have been appended because that Hiscox Baptist Manual's got to be 100 years old. So they have been most definitely updating their beliefs. And where do they come from? Man. It depends on what specific conference that this one follows, the biggest one, of course, around here would be what? Southern Baptist Conference. But what has happened this year and last year with Southern Baptist Conference churches? They've left over LBGTQ plus. I think, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, this is right off the top. I hadn't thought about this in a little while. I think something along the lines of 6,000 churches over the country have left the Southern Baptist Conference because of it. Again, back to the point, it's by man. So now our next closest one, I believe, would be down the street, and that would be St. Paul's. We had a little discussion. What in the world is St. Paul's Methodist Church? Okay, what does the Methodist operate by? And I promise I'll quit after a second. What do the Methodists operate by? The Methodist discipline. What's the next one? Seventh-day Adventist. What do they operate by? And one of our preachers here in town was telling me that he was having a Bible study with someone who goes to that church, and he's like, I don't really know a whole lot about it. I'm like, oh boy, you're about to learn. If you dive into it, you're about to learn some stuff based off of the teachings of who? Off of man, definitely, off of man. Jim, the Seventh-day Adventist, based off the teachings of who? Ellen G. White. Ellen G. White. Okay, one more. Let's go to the more. So technically, the Episcopal Church would be the next one, but let's take a little bit, go past Emma's house to the Mormon temple. So RV, is that right? Yes. Beyond Emma's house, y'all know where Emma lives. So beyond Emma's house in Brook Hollow is the Mormon temple. Follows the teachings of who? Joseph Smith. And currently, who? So do you know the authority structure of the Mormon church? They have 12. They have 12 apostles. They have 12 apostles. So, we have picked, I think, a representation. Definitely we picked a good representation of all the places around us because it's all the places within a couple of mile radius. But, I forgot about the Catholic Church because as the crow flies, I keep forgetting about it. So what's the Catholic Church based off of? The Catechism. And also, I mean, this doesn't come around as much as we would think, but it does come around. Probably every year, some make a lot of news, some make hardly a ripple unless you're Roman Catholic. Every year we have papal pronouncements. Papal pronouncements. So, okay, long way of saying, who do a lot of people look to for their authority? Man. In some form or fashion, they look to man. Churches of Christ, meaning that churches who are going to really legitimately try to be the ones who are identified with Jesus Christ, can only look one place, and that's where? And that is Christ. It's actually kind of eye-opening to people if you get the opportunities, if people start asking you, well, tell me about churches of Christ. Or if it's started with the way that some of my conversations start, I've heard that's a what? I've heard it's a cult. And so I've got, or Campbellite, yeah. That one's not used nearly as much as cult, at least in my experience. But I've kind of got a way that I try to answer people when they tell me that it's a cult. Because normally a cult means, I think, maybe the defining feature, one of the two defining features of a cult would be, first of all, that it follows the teachings of a single person, and that person believes they what? They are somehow directly connected with God. They have received a direct revelation from God. It'd be hard to pick what is the more important of those two, but those are the two key ones. So if someone says Churches of Christ are a cult, I've got this whole kind of thing that I talk to them about. And one of the things that amazes them is when I talk to them about the structure of Churches of Christ, which means that we don't have a headquarters. There is no letterhead that they can find online. There is no website that shows that we are an organization that has some kind of structure, worldwide or otherwise. And that really amazes a lot of people. They just can't hardly believe that because they've probably been misinformed all of their lives. Okay, so what else does this respect for God and His authority mean to you? Yes, yes. Yes. That's actually an important point because the name is important. The fact that we have chosen the name Church of Christ, that is important because it's, in the end, a New Testament name. And it's important to be a New Testament name. But there's a lot of people, and Rolando brings this up perfectly well, that understand that and are able to take that concept and twist it so much that it can get really confusing to you. So is the name important? Yeah, it absolutely is. But it certainly is not everything that defines what the church is. Because people will come back and say, well, I'm a Church of Christ. I mean, yes, we call ourselves Timber Creek, but we're a Church of Christ. Or we call ourselves Fairview Baptist Church, but we're a Church of Christ. We're under Christ Church. And so it muddies the water. And it makes it can get really confusing for you if you're trying to talk to people. Really can. Okay, so let's kind of go back to what Janice said. So we have all of these different groups and they've got all of these very particular beliefs because those beliefs have been created by committees or by individual people. But a lot of the shift of what churches do now caters to what? To more to entertainment. Because why do they do that? Because it is attractive. It does tend to bring in people, tends to bring in numbers. That was bigger in the past than it is now. And when I say past, I'm talking about the last 30 or 40 years. I think I mentioned last week that starting around the 1990s, and I'm thinking about having a lesson, and I've had a lot of lessons on church growth, but kind of identifying the 4 factors that begin in the 90s that kind of started the decline all across the board. Every religious group that you can think of in the United States that started the decline back in the 90s. So when I say in the past, I mean, the past of pretty much everyone here in the room. Back in the 1990s. That was very, very popular. Now that's begun to wane a little bit, but it's still extremely effective. And why is it effective? Why is it effective? Think about for a child. Why is it effective for a child? Because it's fun. I mean, it's fun. And let's face it, if you're a kid, who wouldn't want to play basketball versus sitting in a room for 40 minutes being lectured to? No matter how good the Bible class teachers are. I mean, if you're a kid, who wouldn't want to do that? So it becomes incredibly necessary for parents and for people in the congregation to try to express and show that there's value in it. Because the one rule of humanity is you only do something if you find what in it? if you find value in it, you said pleasure. Is that right? It's bigger than that. I would agree with that, but it's bigger than, because we do a lot of things that I don't particularly I don't take pleasure in, but I see value in it. For example, I put my money in the bank. I'd much rather what? I'd much rather spend it, because that gives me a lot of pleasure, but there's not a lot of value in it. See what I mean? Humanity, the major rule of humanity, we only do things that have value to us. So it's hard for a kid when they could play basketball or they could play video games at the church building at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning to try to pull them away and to sit through a lesson or to sit through a Bible class. So, that's where parents come in. And what do parents do? They say, that's what you learn the value in it. Kids, I guess, come to some value naturally, but most of the time kids have to what? They've got to be taught. This is what has value. And roughly speaking, the values that the parents have are transferred onto the children, and those values exist for a little while, and then this is just part of the complexity of raising children. Then their values begin to be changed by about 12 different things. And then, as far as a parent, boy, you're just off to the races, hoping and praying that they always come back to the values that you taught them as being important. But we all have to respect the authority of Christ. And the authority of Christ says that the church is an organization, it's a structure, it's an institution that tries to bring people into better compliance with the will of God. And how do you do that? What is the power of God to salvation? It's the Word. And so by preaching the Word, by teaching the Word, by concentrating on the Word, this is how we try to bring people into compliance with that Word. I've quoted Colossians 1 verse 28 to you guys many times. I love it. Paul says that we preach Christ to every man, and we're trying to bring them to perfection. We're trying to bring them to completeness, and that's how you do it. Okay, let's talk about another one, and that is respecting of all of the other members. Respecting of all of the other members. So, in respecting of all the other members, let's talk about Romans chapter 12, verse 5. Romans chapter 12, verse 5. What does Romans 12, verse 5 say? Okay, so as being members of one another, we're bound together in Jesus Christ. Going back to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 25 through 26, we have care for one another. If a part of the body, if your toe hurts, what does your leg kind of do? If your toe hurts, what does your leg do? Kind of eases up. If your knee hurts, what does your hip do? If your knee hurts, what does your hip do? Kind of adjusts. It kind of modifies its movement. Same would be true with your foot. Maybe your knee hurts, and your knee hurts because your foot touches the ground in a very specific way. So what's that foot going to do? It's going to move a little bit to try to ease up that pain. And that happens all over the body. We use a lot of illustrations about that. But when members have difficulty, what do other members do? We try to help. And we try to show that, yes, there is care for one another. When one part of the body hurts, the whole body should be what? Should be affected. They should hurt. We should be thinking about people. We should be thinking about Dorothy, who's having to go through watching one of her children pass from life. We should be thinking about Lottie, who's reaching the sunset of her life. We should be thinking about Betty Solis, who's not been able to worship with the saints for 7 or 8 years or so. We should be thinking, when they hurt, we should what? We should hurt. Nell was gone. We knew Nell wouldn't be down, but she was for a few weeks, and now she's back. When one member of the body hurts, we ought to all hurt, and that's part of what the body does. We need to, in Ephesians chapter 4, try our very best to keep what? To keep what? Ephesians 4, I believe it's especially in verse 2, we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Why is keeping unity and harmony so important? So if you have discord, two things happen. And again, very, very high ability to predict this, high correlation. Two things happen. First of all, if a congregation has problems, it loses people because they what? They're not satisfied, they leave. And then secondly, when new people come in, they're able to, and you think you can put a really nice plaster work on it and hide it, but when people come in, what can they feel? What can they tell? They feel that something's wrong. Now they can't come in the first time they visit and pinpoint the two people who are mad at each other and can't seem to kind of bring it together, and the rest of the church that's kind of affected. But they know that something's just not right. So what do? They go to a place that feels right. And that's why it's important. We'll bring up more of this importance when this will be after the gospel meeting, but we'll start here and kind of make a few more comments about that.